Welcome to memoQ Talks, where we talk to industry leaders about their experiences, lessons learned, and what works best across all areas of localization. Now here's your host.
Hey Balázs, how are you?
Hi Mark, I'm fine. How are you?
Good.
I'm just speak to you.
Likewise. Yeah. No, it's I'm just getting started here. It's about 9 a.m. for me. I mean, actually, to be honest, I've been running since about 7 a.m. because I have to talk with my European colleagues. You guys.
Yes. Guilty as charged. It's over here. It's 6 o'clock in the evening. So
okay. Well thanks for making time.
It's a different cadence.
Exactly. Hey, and it's a holiday today in Hungary as well, right?
It is a holiday today in Hungary. It's October the 23rd,
which is
the anniversary of an uprising that happened against Soviet rule in 1956.
Oh, that's a big one. Yes.
So that's the anniversary that we are celebrating today, and it only became a holiday after, obviously, the regime changed in 1990.
Wow. And is it like a bank holiday? Everything shuts down?
It is a proper bank holiday. Everything is shut down, and it's right in the middle of the week.
Well, again, just thank you for, joining the podcast, memoQ Talks on a holiday. I appreciate that.
It's my pleasure. Yes.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to talk to you about your transition into a couple different roles at memoQ. When I first joined memoQ, you were co-CEO, which is the first time I've ever worked with an organization that has two different CEOs, and I'd like to talk a little bit about that. But now you're transitioning to a new role as a Chief Evangelist, and I want to talk about that and some of the things that you're going to be doing. But I also I want to touch on some of the changes in our industry, like this thing called AI, and what are some of the ramifications and implications of that. But maybe we can take a step back because you were one of the co-founders of memoQ, and maybe just talk a little bit about how did you get an idea to hey, I'm going to go build a TMS or a cat tool? How did that happen? And maybe just talk a little bit about the early days.
Well, when I'm asked about this, I always have to think how long I want to go back, because the story begins in the early 90s. Because I was always fascinated by languages. I went to engineering school. I studied programming and IT engineering. But even back then, I took an extra course about neural network. Mind you, we are talking about 1992, and my thesis work, my graduation work was about parsing. Parsing is computational analysis of sentences and text. And back then I found a company here in Hungary that was able to sponsor my graduation work, because no one except for one person at the university knew how computers could tackle natural language back at the time. Again, back at the time, everything was rule-based, so it didn't look anything like the language models and machine translation engines and other tools today. But again, more than 30 years have passed. And so naturally, I got in touch with language technology, the language technology at the time, and soon we began to work on Hungarian English to Hungarian machine translation project around 2000, and this is how I met my co-founders at memoQ, because one of them, Gabor, if you hadn't had him on the podcast, I would highly recommend an interview with him, because he's a good speaker and he's very interesting in that.
He's on my hit list now. Okay, good.
Yes, that was my intention. So and he originally came on board at the young and tender age of 21.
Wow.
To create a rule set for the machine translation system that we were building. Again, back at the time, everything was rule-based. So it has no value whatsoever in today's world. But he soon ended up writing the engine, and a funny situation ensued because we were competing in writing an engine. So he wrote an engine, I wrote an engine for a different purpose, but both engines could translate, and both engines were based pretty much on the same principles. So, and the punchline of the story is that he won. So it was his code that got into the finished product in the end.
Wow.
But we became friends in the process, and our third co-founder joined us as a marketer back at the time. But we also knew him from another line of work. I was active in publishing back at the time. We had a small family publishing company, which is, I don't talk about it much, but it was very instrumental in creating what eventually became memoQ TMS, because the publishing company was all about computing, all about engineering books, mostly translated from English, some original Hungarian titles. If the viewers don't know, the founders of memoQ are Hungarians, and I'm sitting, more precisely standing in Budapest, Hungary right now, and in my everyday life I speak Hungarian. I make an exception with you. So
thank you, thank goodness.
So most of the books were translated from English, and some of these were huge volumes, and you know how quickly books about computing, programming, and technology get dated.
Right.
So these volumes had to be translated in book quality in pretty short timelines, and we were thinking of workflows to do that. And we were running these workflows, multiple translators, editing and proofreading running as parallel as possible to the translation process. And we were running these workflows. Back then, this was called collaborative translation. So we were running these workflows using email and Microsoft Word. And then we thought, how marvelous it would be to actually have software dealing with this. So this was one of the sources of the ideas behind memoQ TMS. The other inspiration was back at Morphologic. That's what the company was called that we all three co-founders used to work for. I would recommend to the viewers to actually look up this company, because they were doing really interesting things in language technology back in the 90s and the early 2000s. So at this company, we were working on a so-called intelligent translation memory technology that would use some enhanced language intelligence to enhance the matches that come from a translation memory. And the only problem was at that time that Morphologic did have electronic dictionaries. It did have a rule-based machine translation system. It didn't have a translation environment, the likes of Trados or IBM TM2 or Deja-Vu or the others that were around at the time.
At that point, were you already aware of this quote unquote localization or translation industries, and specifically translation technology industry? You were. Okay.
Yes, because one of the influences that we had was also Microsoft. So we used to translate books from Microsoft. Microsoft had a very reputable publishing company up until 2001 called Microsoft Press. These were good books. And obviously, when you translate text about Microsoft products, you need to use the localized versions of Microsoft products. So it was important to get in touch with the people who were actually creating localized, especially the Hungarian versions. So we, as soon as 1997, 98, we started sitting down with the people who were creating localized Microsoft products. and especially the terminology that was used in Microsoft products. And soon enough, they actually started involving us in the terminology. We were the first to translate works about Microsoft servers, for instance. So that was another influence, and we went even as far as under Morphologic's umbrella. I used to resell Trados Translators Workbench in Hungary in the late 90s. So that's how much we were connected to the industry. Yes, how dare I? But
I think the statute of limitations has run out on that offense, but that's okay.
Yep. My only excuse is that the concept of memoQ hadn't been born at that time. So I didn't know that I would be competing with my future self.
That's funny. Yeah. Considering that there were already some existing technologies out there, why did you and your co-founders feel that, hey, we want to go ahead and create our own solution? What opportunity or opening in the market did you see?
So let me again go back a bit, because originally we didn't want to create a translation tool. We had this linguistically enhanced translation memory engine at Morphologic, and all that we knew was that we needed a translation environment to try it in. And we were first starting to look for a translation environment where this can be plugged in. We found none because the technologies were pretty closed at the time. And then we started, still within Morphologic, we started exploring the possibilities of building a minimum environment where this engine could be tested and proven. And we started off by running pretty much a competitive analysis of the translation environments at the time. And because we decided, even if we build something, even if it were to be simplistic, it needs to be better than the existing ones. It needs to learn from the shortcomings of the existing ones. There were plenty, and there was a huge gap between the requirements of the tools towards translators' technical abilities and the actual technical expertise and computer literacy of the translators. That was one of the biggest problems at the time. Not anymore, but 20 years have passed. And the other shortcoming was that there was no affordable collaborative translation environment. Today, we would call that a translation management system.
Mm-hmm.
So we saw, technically speaking, plenty of opportunity, but back at that time, the team that we worked with didn't see the opportunity there and was not interested in pursuing that project. And we founded memoQ pretty much because our existing team didn't want to go ahead and explore this idea further. But we were enthusiastic and we were too far gone, and we simply had to do this. You see, there wasn't even a rationalistic or realistic market survey or expectation or a business plan behind it. We just knew that what we build will be better than most, if not all, of the systems out there, and we were confident, and we felt this in the first years because we went to TechCom. Back then it was held in Wiesbaden, Germany. It's still in Germany, but not in Wiesbaden. And we were looking at each other. Why does everyone want to buy the company but not the product? And it was, we made some inroads. We were able to make some sales to individual translators and some LSPs, but it wasn't until our current CEO, my former co-CEO, Peter Reynolds, came on board in early first in early 2008 to help us learn about the market, learn about the market segments, learn about the target groups, and identify the potential markets where memoQ can efficiently grow. And when we were able to pinpoint the small to medium-sized language service provider, translation company, as the main target market at the time, we are talking about 2008, only then have we been able to start growing efficiently. Starting that year, memoQ started growing 100+% a year, 100 to 148% a year, and over 3 consecutive years. So this what laid the foundations of a company that is self-sustaining, that is financially stable, and this is where I trace back the current good standing of the company.
That's awesome. I was actually going to ask you, did you have an aha moment where you said, hey, you know what? This is going to work. This is actually going to work. And we are going to become, a self-sustaining, viable company. And do you remember like one time, like looking at your co-founders or having a conversation with Peter and just saying like, you know what, this is working? Or was it just kind of like a process that just evolved?
Strangely enough, I don't remember a moment.
Ooh.
But when we were looking at the numbers year after year, 2009, 2010, 2011, and so these numbers of revenue growth of 124%, 148%, 108%, and even in the fourth year, 86%. That was when we entered into 2010. There was no doubt that this is going to be a sustainable company, and it will grow.
That must have felt really good, because it wasn't an overnight success. You guys did the hard work, and you stuck with it, and then you got to the light at the end of the tunnel, and it all turned out.
And there's no guarantee that things like that would succeed. So one of my favorite talks is one that was made by Jack Conte, founder of Patreon.
Okay.
He has it's worth looking up. It's on YouTube. He has a talk that is titled "Nothing Works."
That's funny.
And because he started off as a struggling musician.
Mm-hmm. And his life got on track when he created Patreon to provide a business model for musicians like himself and for others. But and before that, and even after that, he talks about trying 1,000 things, and there was only one that started working. And you need that only one idea, only one pursuit that starts working. And in our lives, it was memoQ. It's funny. I was listening to some successful business people last week talk on a podcast, and somebody said, in order to have one good idea, you need to have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of bad ideas. And the challenge is understanding which is which, and having this person was recommending having close knit group of trusted advisors and friends who can be just very honest enough. And if all of your friends tell you it's a stupid idea and you trust them, but if a couple of them say, hey, you know what, this is good. So, but it's really tough. But a lot of people are reluctant to come up with ideas because they're like, well, that's a bad idea. They were saying it's okay to have bad ideas because that's will help you get to the good ideas. It's just figuring out. Let me ask you.
But it's always a question that, how are you sure it's a bad idea?
Right.
Many times it isn't.
Right. So if we jump forward, I mean, then because you mentioned that Peter joined in 2008 as CEO. I think that at some point you took over as CEO. Then Peter came back, and you guys decided to.
Sorry to just
Yeah.
correct this a bit. Peter didn't join as a CEO back then. I was the CEO. Well, I mean, you're a CEO of a company of 4, 5.
Okay.
So it's not the kind of CEOs that the general public thinks of when they think of all these magnates and billionaires and others. Nothing of the sort. Peter joined us as an advisor,
mm-hmm.
and only joined the company later, both as a full-time advisor and a shareholder.
Gotcha.
So, and he was not CEO before 2020. He was always on the board, always influential, but he first became a co-CEO together with me.
And, so let's talk about that, because that's about the time that I started working closely with memoQ, and I thought you guys did a really good job of being co-CEOs. And you had your respective areas of focus, but you were also very collaborative. Maybe you can talk a little bit about that experience. You've built this company up. You've been CEO from a 4-person company on up to, at that point, it was probably close to 100, if not more, employees in 2020. And one of the major players in the TMS space. And then you decide to kind of share the ring of power with, and that's not an easy thing to do. So talk a little bit about that, and what was the success factors? Because in my opinion, where I sat, you guys, you made it work.
Thank you for saying that. It wasn't without blood, sweat, and tears. And if I'm honest, I have to say that all the CEOs prior to this period where we stepped up with Peter as co-CEOs were struggling, and I very strongly felt that the main factor behind this struggle is that they are alone. They are isolated, and we saw it firsthand that this doesn't work. And if you are in a position, especially when you take over during the pandemic, the company is struggling with some problems. We had to redefine our strategy at the time. It's not a good thing to actually throw someone under the bus. That here is the CEO job. You're responsible for everything, and you're on your own. Good luck.
Yeah.
So we both very strongly felt that an isolated CEO doesn't work, and it was a funny detail back at the time. Netflix appointed co-CEOs roughly at the same time.
I remember that. Yeah, I remember that.
We were reading about that, and we thought this was a good idea, and it proved to be a good idea. And one of the reasons I was able to let this go after 4 years, being a CEO was not a job I enjoy very much. People know this about me. I was always known as a very kind and compassionate boss, which doesn't always work. One of the reasons I was able to let this go is that over the 4 years, we were able to build a very strong and very, very, very cohesive management team. So even though there is one CEO at the top, he can know or she can know that there are people in the company that they can count on, that they can turn to for advice, and who will tell them when something isn't right.
Yeah, I think it's huge.
That's more important than having co-CEOs. Once you have a cohesive and very competent management team, you don't need that anymore.
I totally agree with you. My experience has been if you get the right people on the bus in those, especially in those leadership roles, and everybody's pulling in the same direction, that creates its own inertia. And then it just makes it easier to kind of execute on the strategy and vision. Throwing out a bunch of jargon, but it really is true. It just, everybody's got to kind of, work together. And if you come in as the hired gun CEO and you don't know the team or whatever like that, it can be a real challenge. But okay, so you guys did that for roughly 4 years, and now you're
Yes.
moving into this Chief Evangelist role, what is that? Why and what does that mean? And let's talk about that.
Yeah. Back when I stepped back, I knew only one thing, that I want to get back close to the profession again.
Mm-hmm.
Because when you're CEO or co-CEO, you are dealing with a whole bunch of bureaucratic stuff and administration and meetings, and you don't do what your first ambition was. You don't do what you learned, and especially you don't grow in that profession, and that's what I was missing. So I'm a kind of obsessive learner, let's say that. And I don't feel good if I start off in a field and I am unable to grow in that. So that was also part of my very selfish reason to try and find another role. And the other thing I like is communicating, writing, talking about things, connecting with peers in the industry, and a chief evangelist role, as we understand it at memoQ, is one such role, because my job is to make the company visible. You could ask, okay, isn't that the job of marketing? And it is, and we are working together very closely. But a chief evangelist is a person who is deeply connected to the industry, and also to and they can also communicate, and they can provide a kind of high-profile communication, high-profile content and visibility that a company also needs. Let me give you an example. For instance, one of the things I started doing is coordinating our speaking opportunities at various conferences, and not just in the translation industry. I am the one who has to know what people could be talking about, what would get accepted, what would give value to the audience of that conference. So it's not me who puts myself out all the time. Well, actually, I've been at this for 30 years, so it would be strange if I didn't attain some level of reputation in the industry, but that's not the point. The point is to have the company grow, have various parts of the company appear at various stages. For instance, recently we talked about people who do data science at the company, deal with financial and economic data, sales data, and the work they did is incredible. And they have every right, and they have they have every right to go to a data science conference and talk about that.
Yep.
And one of the things that we are not good at, and that some people say this is a very specifically Hungarian trait, is that we work for the drawer. We do some good things and we don't talk about them. Partly, there could be two reasons behind that. One of them is that we don't think it's good. We don't think it has value. We debase what we create, or we are we have a strange kind of hubris about it and expect people to notice it.
Oh,
and neither extreme is true.
Yeah.
And what is true is that you need to go out there and show it. And I am there to provide this kind of instinct that the company doesn't have on its own. again, you can attribute this to culture. You can attribute this to kind of a national culture here. I'm not investigating the root cause of this. I'm there to counteract it.
Yeah, and you yourself are, I think, extremely humble. I mean, you've been on the boards of different industry associations in the local industry. You're, I would say, one of the more high profile people in the industry. But under, what was the word? Soft spoken. You're not out there like as a super promoter, but you're there, and you're respected. And I can see that you could facilitate many different opportunities for the memoQ colleagues to go ahead and speak or present at these different events, and so I totally agree. I also, as a West Coast American, have a different approach to marketing and sales probably than a typical Hungarian company, right? And I'm a big believer in going out there and selling the sizzle. And in Europe in general, sometimes I would say that the marketing is a bit more understated. And I'm not saying there's a right and wrong. I think, we all have our different target markets and you should adapt to those markets. But if you're adapting to your target market and you are typically a bit more reserved and your target market is like everything's amazing, man, then maybe you have to change gears a little bit, right? When you go to that target market, and Americans probably have to shift down or throttle down a little bit when they go to Europe and don't do direct competitor comparisons, for example, and say, hey, we're great, they're bad, because that's not so good. But here, man, it's just, it's the Wild West when it comes to marketing.
Yeah, I mean,
let me ask you,
Chief, every role, we work for a company, so ultimately every role is about sales, if you will. It has a right to exist as long as it helps the revenues grow, however indirectly. And if your company is trying to get a foothold in North America, then we need to learn from what works in North America.
Win in Rome. Win in Rome.
Yes,
do as
precisely.
So another thing that you're going to be taking on is you're going to be doing some podcasting. And I was kind of co-founder of the memoQ Talks podcast. I think you're going to do some memoQ Talks, but you're also going to do some other things. So talk about your vision for, how you're going to do that, who you're going to talk to, because I think you're going to also look at some different formats, shorter format, long, I don't know. So, talk a little bit about that.
It's the one reason this is not very easy to talk about is that the plans are still forming. But the main thing that I've been looking at is how to use some unconventional means. I mean, unconventional in the industry, in translation technology to increase the visibility of the company. And to be entirely honest, if you want to grow in language technologies, and I'm not talking about the generic AI providers, large language model providers, but very specific creators of enterprise localization technology, which is a much narrower, much smaller market. If you are to promote a product like memoQ is in that space, you also need to promote the industry, because there's a whole world out there that doesn't know that this industry exists and doesn't know that they actually need the processes and products and services of this industry. And they are recognizing that you can speed it up. And one of the means to do that is to get out there. And like I said, everything is about increasing revenues, but if you can be entertaining, if you can be engaging while you are doing that, that's all the better, and makes your company, makes your community, your product all the more attractive. So that is how I think of our podcasts, where I asked to join you in co-producing it in the future. And this is how I also plan my own podcast about the industry. It will most likely start in the first 1 or 2 months of 2025.
Mm-hmm.
But and I'd like to talk to people who are connected to the language industry or multilinguality or the boundary, or exist on the boundaries, or work on the boundaries of various cultures, and deal with taking values to one culture from another to another, but also are connected to other other industries, other walks of life, other kinds of activities.
Mm-hmm.
And this is what could make this forum that we have here a more interesting, much more interesting. So what we could build up is a very interesting kind of podcast slash talk show in the industry that would attract a way higher number of regular viewers than it does today. And I am not saying this to criticize memoQ's numbers, because the compared to the rest of the industry, the viewership and the subscription numbers for memoQ Talks is pretty impressive. But like I have never seen anything that couldn't be improved. So this is what we are embarking on. So and what also I figured, if you put more content out there, then some of the content can be hardcore industry, hardcore professional content, and some smaller proportion of the content can be more like entertainment than
Absolutely.
technical content.
I'm looking forward to it. I think it's always good. Originally, when we started memoQ Talks, I had a co-creator, co-founder, and we kind of helped each other along. Both in terms of ideation, but I would see something. I watched Chedimir's interview with you, and I was like, oh man, so I got to up my camera game. It's like we were learning from each other, but also in terms of topics and different approaches. So totally agree with you, and I think there's a lot of things that can be done. It's fun. I enjoy talking with people, but there's all, like you said, broadening the audience and maybe changing the approach a bit. It's always good, Let me ask you, you've been in the industry, if I'm doing the math right, about 32 years. You said 1992 to now. Yeah. So what have been the biggest one or two changes in those 32 years? And if it's not AI, how does AI compare to those other big changes?
I don't, and this might be surprising already. I don't subscribe to cataclysms.
Okay.
So good. when I look at AI, when I look at machine translation,
yeah.
when I look at, and don't forget that over these little more than 30 years, one of the biggest things that happened is that the internet emerged and became accessible to everybody. Right. So I remember that I've been writing code since the age of 13. So I've been writing code for 17 years when I first got access to broadband internet around 2000. So there were a lot of changes also in our lives. If you think how our computers changed, how our equipment changed, and everything has roots in history. So, for instance, and that was something that was a conference called AI Summit in Budapest a couple of weeks ago, and I was asked to talk about our relationship with AI, and also we had another blog post a couple of months ago about our take on generative AI, and for that I was researching literature. I did my PhD. I was taught how to use the scientific method, how to research things, how to look up existing things in literature. So that's what I did. And I found that one of the most impactful articles about neural networks, the mathematics of neural networks as we know them today, transformer models and the like, was written by none other than Alan Turing in 1948.
Oh my gosh. That's
And
crazy.
this is how long the ideas go back. Or for instance, did you know that the first experiment with a translation memory happened in a United States military compound in the German city of Mannheim in 1965? So, and this is in the so-called ALPAC report. That was a Department of Defense committee that was looking into the successes that were, or that had, or rather had not been made in machine translation back at the time. The committee was established in 1964, and the report that said that there is no viable machine translation in sight in the near future, that report was first published in 1966.
Wow.
And this translation memory experiment is described in one of the annexes of this report. And this, I think this still should be a mandatory reading for everybody who wants to develop translation automation of any kind, whether NMT, LLM, everything. And if you know that, then you are way less surprised by the developments that happen, because it was only a matter of time. And there were many factors. So, for instance, in the 2000s, someone had to figure out how to use graphical processors to run neural networks, and based on that, people could finally test out the models that they had in theory but had no equipment to run them. And the list goes on. So this is how I feel. Even what looks like a cataclysm wasn't without history, wasn't without precursors, and shouldn't have been unexpected at all.
No, I mean, so if you look back, you can closely enough, you can kind of predict the future, and you can see that some of these things have been in the works for half a century or more. I like the fact that we don't need to get all worked up about quote unquote cataclysmic events. I was at a dinner the other day, and somebody was like, "I'm really worried about AI," and I was like, "Well, what about AI?" It really worries me, and I'm like, I'm more worried about, crossing the road than I am about, this general, because it's like you can get this anxiety, and I'm like, come on, yes. let's break it down in manageable chunks here. But if you look at also throughout history, change is a constant. Technology is not going away. But let me ask you, because I liked it. My question was more focused on the local industry, but you talked about kind of macro factors like the internet. That's probably changed the world more than anything that I can think of in my lifetime in terms of how we interact. Phones have done this thing too with social media, massive impacts on kids and everybody. But in terms of where we're at with AI in our industry, okay, put your crystal ball in front of you here. What do you think are going to be the biggest changes? And I'm not even talking about cataclysmic, but I mean, some of these changes hopefully will be beneficial, right? But what are they going to be the biggest changes over the next 2, 3, 4 years in terms of our industry?
So we have this wavefront of the large language models becoming accessible to the general public and making inroads into areas that they have not been used in before. But in the wake of this wavefront, there will be, and it's not only me saying this, there will be a kind of cooling off effect, which doesn't mean that the AI technologies as we know today will cease to be used or cease to exist or anything like that. But people will take some steps back and start using them for what they are good for. Not for everything, but these technologies will become useful in areas that we don't know yet, although there are, for instance, agents that would that would get involved in project management, for instance. The other thing that we know is that the technology is not only for the tech giants and the billionaires. So we have these huge generic models that have their own limitations. For instance, with the GPT models at the to keep up the GPT models, to keep training, retraining, fine-tuning them, researchers are scraping the barrels for data.
Right.
But if you think at a smaller scale and build specialized models, much smaller models, but good for some specific purposes and providing better accuracy and better response times than the huge generic model. The attractive feature of a generic model is that it's easy to access. Almost everybody can learn to do prompts and get some output out of the system. But what they don't think of is the extra resources, the extra happenings in the system that are not really necessary to create that answer, but happen anyway because the model is so huge. And it also consumes resources, energy, and whatnot. So my prediction is that people are actually, again, building smaller specialized models based on the same principles, which will be accessible for specific purposes, specific groups of businesses, organizations, activities, and work at a much higher level of efficiency in terms of resource consumption, in terms of response times, in terms of data consumption.
So what I'm hearing you say is going forward, there's going to be a greater degree of specialization, customization, and to fit specific needs of individuals or specific companies, organizations. And like, maybe 20 years ago, the idea of having something like this that does all the things that it was mind blowing. And like, we were like, no, it's impossible. But this right now has become part of everybody's life, right? I mean, it's, it's a map, it's a search tool, it's a whatever, it's a flashlight. You can do so many different things, right? And it's like, if I go out without this, I feel exposed. And I'm like, where's my phone, right? I mean, because I can do payments on this. I can do this. It's amazing. So, pretty soon I would assume that whether the AI is on this or it has some other kind of, form, but it will be as equally, if not more important to our lives in terms of just being a tool. Because that's what I look at this as. This is a tool, right? I mean, the phone, I should say.
Absolutely. Yeah. But I want to make another comment to that though.
Sure.
Because AI is already in there. So it's calling only the large language models AI is misleading. So there's a huge amount of AI in even without large language models in today's mobile devices. For instance, it uses face recognition as an authentication method. That's AI. Yeah. It uses statistical linguistic analysis, even some neural methods to provide predictive typing. That's AI. No one said it has to be neural, it has to be a large language model. There are simpler instances of AI. There have been simpler instances of AI for decades, for 40 years at least. So let's just not forget this. Yeah.
So it didn't just pop up yesterday and it's going to take over the world. It's been around us for a while and it's going to continue to be around us. Awesome. Well, you know what, Balázs, first off, congratulations on your really successful journey with 32 years with in this space and the growth of memoQ and the success of memoQ. I think I think you, in addition to creating a successful company, you have created a very nice corporate culture. Speaking from, as one who's been part of that organization for about 3 or 4 years right now, so it's a very nice, I guess, supportive organization culture. But also congratulations on your new role as Chief Evangelist. I think you're going to do great. I mean, like you said, you know this industry. You have access to the largest organizations and the different subject matter experts, and I think that you can bring a lot of value to the table. And I'm really looking forward to seeing you in these events, also facilitating the participation of our colleagues to participate, and more podcasts, man. The more, the better. So
absolutely, we will soar.
Awesome, man.
We will soar. I'm pretty sure of that.
Well, thank you for taking time on a national holiday to come on the memoQ Talks, and I look forward to seeing you hopefully over here or over there sometime soon.
Absolutely, and thank you to the audience, whoever views this. You are also part of the story. Thank you very much.
Thanks, guys. Cheers.
Thank you.
Thank you for joining memoQ Talks, where we talked with industry leaders about their experiences and lessons learned to gain new insights about what works best across all areas of localization. Join us next time on memoQ Talks.